A group of head teachers here in Britain has warned parents that they'll report them to the police for neglect if they allow their children to play video games rated for over 18s. They said that playing such games or accessing certain social media sites could leave children vulnerable to sexual exploitation or extreme violence. We brought together Milo Yiannopoulos, a technology journalist and the author of an upcoming book about video games, and Elizabeth O'Shea, a parenting expert from the website Parent for Success.
It's interesting. It's raised a whole question about what parents should be allowing their children to watch. So I think to a certain extent, it's an interesting debate to raise. And I think a lot of parents are allowing their children to watch age inappropriate videos and play on them. And I think in that sense, it's quite a good thing. Having said that, I think that most schools should think about actually working with the parents to educate them about what their concerns are and how they can regulate what their children are watching, because parents don't always know what's in these video games. They haven't been brought up with them when they were children, and it's really difficult to understand the violence and the sexual innuendos that are in some of these video games.
Because the head teachers are saying that the parents are basically guilty of neglect. Would you go along with that?
It's really hard because David Cameron's just announced that it's now a crime if you don't report neglect, if you feel that a child is being neglected. I wouldn't go as far as to say that. I think a lot of parents are allowing children to watch age inappropriate videos because of pester power, and it's because all their friends are watching it and they don't want to be seen as the killjoy. Having said that, I think a lot of parents aren't making discerned decisions about what their children should be watching.
So, Milo, do you think this warning from the head teachers is a bit over the top?
I find it absolutely extraordinary that schools and that the state should be seeking to interfere in how parents parent their children, into what parents consider appropriate entertainment for their children. The reality of the research on this is there's no evidence whatsoever, or at a bare minimum the jury is out as to whether these video games have any effect on whether children become more violent or sexist or whatever. The reality is they don't make a difference. There is some research to suggest that in fact when boys let off steam, in particular boys let off steam playing video games with boobs and bombs, let's say, that in fact they behave better later. Now, campaigners often muddy the waters by misrepresenting research to suggest that when people play violent games, it produces aggressiveness. It doesn't. It can put people in a sort of aggressive, competitive state of mind, like any competitive activity, and all sports fall into that category too. But the reality is these video games don't do anybody any harm. And for schools and head teachers to be wading in and reporting parents to the police because they let their children play a video game that was, by some distant ratings authority, decided to ranked as an 18 video game, strikes me as an extraordinary infringement on private liberty and on the sanctity of the home.
So, I mean, you're taking issue with the whole ratings of video games. I mean, it's there for a reason, presumably. I mean, would you let a child go to see a film in a cinema that have been rated 18?
I think it's right that cinemas respect the ratings that have been awarded to movies by independent ratings authorities.
Why should cinemas and yet not parents?
Well, because as a broad brush, rough indication of what sort of content is likely to be appropriate for children of particular ages, they don't do a terrible job. But it's quite a different thing to say that there should be some sort of criminal liability for parents or some other sort of state-sanctioned punishment for parents who have decided that their particular child is mature enough or intellectually developed
well enough. But the issue here is that the parents aren't taking that kind of decision.
Well, I don't think that anybody knows that. I don't think it's possible.
Children are watching these videos by default.
Well, I don't think it's possible to say that. I don't think anybody knows how well most parents are educated in what exactly is in video games. I don't think anybody knows that. I think that's supposition.
Elizabeth, where do you stand on this?
Well, it's a really interesting point of view, but I would say there are ratings for a reason. We have 18 film ratings for a reason. We have 18 video game ratings for a reason. It isn't entirely appropriate. What you have to remember is 15 of the 16 schools were primary schools. So these are children up to the age of 11 that are being allowed to watch play games that are rated for 17-year-olds and above.
Can you give us an example of a video game you object to?
Well, the Grand Theft Auto and the Call of Duty are the two ones that were cited by the head teachers that they were concerned
What is it in those
about.
games that you consider to be inappropriate for primary school children?
Well, in Grand Theft Auto, one particular thing is where you have sex with a prostitute, but you may kill her in order not to have to part with your money. Now, that's not appropriate for a primary school child.
Do you think it is, Milo?
No, but they're not games that are marketed at children. They're not games that most children play.
Exactly, which is why...
But this is what we're talking about, isn't it? We're
Yes.
talking about children watching games that are not marketed for them.
I think what you have to understand is where this all comes from. This is, let's be honest, mainly about boys. This is about judging boys to feminine standards, and it is about punishing boisterousness and enthusiasm for violence and sex among young boys, all of whom, I mean, by the age of 12, they're having sex already. Yet people like Elizabeth want to sort of stop them seeing it on a video game screen or watching movies about it. They're already out having sex. It strikes me as absurd.
Elizabeth?
Actually, well, it's interesting, Molly, that you don't seem to know. There's research by Ohio State University and Brock University in Canada that say that children who play repeated brutal video games are learning thought patterns, and they've been found to be more violent. And
Okay, this is exactly what I was talking about earlier. I mean, I've never heard of Brock University. I don't suppose many listeners have, but what the general overview of this from people who look into the broad brush of research around video games, people like Christina Hoff-Summers at the American Enterprise Institute, a variety of other scholars, all agree that the science is very much out on this. And what they also agree on is that campaigners against video games constantly misrepresent research, which shows that very competitive games of all kinds, whether it's sports or whether it's games about blowing things up on alien islands or alien planets or whatever, all of these games can create a more competitive, you would say aggressive, I would say competitive attitude in players of all ages immediately afterwards. But that attitude, that's, you know, what you would quite sensationalistically call rewiring of the brain or whatever, is actually just a state of mind that dissipates very quickly and has no long-term effect whatsoever.
Okay, listen, I'm going to have to wind it up now with the conclusion that there is conflicting evidence about the detrimental effect of these video games on children. But the point that Milo made right at the beginning, Elizabeth, namely the right of the state to interfere in the way that an adult brings up their child.
It's a really tricky area, and of course the state do have to interfere sometimes where poor parenting is involved, and that's really tragic, but it's needed. And it's important to start for parents to raise the debate: is this appropriate for my child? And if it isn't, when is it appropriate? But just remember, they're very violent video games, and it's really important that parents understand what's contained in them and are able to see that before they make a decision. And a lot of parents don't have the ability to play the games to the levels where some of this is apparent.
That was Elizabeth O'Shea, a parenting expert from the website Parent for Success. We also heard from Milo Yiannopoulos, a technology journalist and the author of an upcoming book about video games.